right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden took a lot of incoming fire this weekend from Senator Bernie Sanders over his vote for the Iraq War. So much so, he sent his best surrogate out on television to respond. Just kidding. He picked former Secretary of State John Kerry, who famously lost the 2004 election to George W. Bush as a result of the same vote. Let's take a listen.
I think that Bernie, regrettably, is distorting Joe's record in the following sense. I mean, he doesn't have what Joe Biden has, which is 8 years of sitting on the National Security Council and demonstrating his judgment, whether it was on his leadership dealing with the migration that was flowing across our border and helping to resolve that with the presidents of those countries, or his work pulling troops out of Iraq and negotiating that and working as perhaps the lead point man on that effort.
You heard that right. John Kerry's defense of Joe Biden's record is not that Joe Biden never voted for the Iraq War. It's that after that terrible vote, he went on to sit on the NSC under Obama and played a pivotal role, getting us even more into the morass that we remain in today. That's the beauty of an up-and-down vote on the war in Iraq. There's no BS to be had about how you privately push back in a secret meeting. You either voted for the war or you didn't. Later on in that clip, Kerry says he was led astray by President Bush, blamed the intelligence community. When Biden last addressed this, he claimed that, quote, from the very moment George W. Bush launched the war in Iraq, that he opposed war. You know who tells a very different story? 2003, Joe Biden.
Some of my own party have said that it was a mistake to go to Iraq in the first place and believe that it's not worth the cost, whatever benefit may flow from our engagement in Iraq. But the cost of not acting against Saddam, I think, would have been much greater. And so is the cost, and so will be the cost, of not finishing this job. The President of the United States is a bold leader, and he is popular. The stakes are high, and the need for leadership is great. I wish he'd use some of his stored-up popularity to make what I admit is not a very popular case. But I and many others will support him when he makes the case.
He didn't misspeak. He said it multiple times. He even advised the next Democratic nominee in the year 2004 not to run on an anti-war position.
There's sort of two schools of thought. I spoke about it today at the National Press Club. There are the multilateralists who argue that we should never use force in my party unless you have international consensus. And there are the guys on the unilateralists in this outfit who say it doesn't matter ever what the international institutions think. We should use force and leverage our power. I think there's a need for more enlightened foreign policy, and I think to make the case that the use of force against Saddam was unjustified is, I think, the wrong case to make.
It's unambiguous. Joe Biden voted for the Iraq War as Senate Foreign Relations Chairman. Then he supported the war for nearly a year after the invasion. Only in 2005 did he begin calling his vote for the war a mistake. There is no getting around it. That is not just an issue to be litigated in the Democratic primary. If Biden is the nominee, it will be a general election issue. Trump savaged Hillary Clinton's vote for the war in Iraq, her role in the decision to withdraw Iraq in 2011, and the decision to bomb Libya. Well, guess who else was in the Situation Room when all those decisions were made? Arguably bears even more responsibility for them. Vice President Joe Biden. Simply saying that your vote for the Iraq War was a mistake is not enough to become commander-in-chief. The vote genuinely represents Biden's foreign policy ideology, which is whatever the Washington consensus has been over the last 40 years. His greatest selling point to the American public on foreign policy is that he's been photographed with world leaders in the past. But that should be one of the biggest knocks against him. Biden was in the room or helped brokered foreign deals for the United States that resulted in American workers getting screwed, the destruction of our middle class by Wall Street banks, and the invasion of a foreign country. The foreign policy team that Biden would bring would result in a continuation of the last 17 years of U.S. foreign policy that got us to where we are today. And America's working class disproportionately bears the brunt of our wars. In fact, a study from July 2017 found that Trump won more votes from communities with higher military casualties than from similar communities which suffered fewer casualties. Iraq war deserves to be an issue in this campaign cycle, given how much of the consequences that we still have to live with. Do not let Joe Biden gaslight you into thinking that he was on the right side of history. And that's all it takes, Crystal. 2 clips from 2003 and 2004 to show that not only did he vote for the war, an enthusiastic drumbeater for the war, telling Democrats and others that they shouldn't make the case against going and deposing Saddam Hussein.
Right.
He didn't say it for years after that the vote for the war was a mistake.
Well, and you picked those 2 clips, which are devastating. There are so many more like it out there. And not to mention in the buildup to war, the role that he played. And Kerry's out there trying to make this insane case that a vote for the war wasn't really a vote for the war, which is just like, I mean, come on, let's be real here. That's the other issue, is that he's never been honest about his support and his role in leading us into that disastrous war. He's still tried to obfuscate. He's tried to pretend now that, you know, he didn't think that voting that way was really going to lead to war. He trusted Bush too much, et cetera, et cetera. When you see that clip, years later, still saying, oh, he's a popular president. I supported him. He should make the case further.
He should just come out and say, I believe President Bush. I'm sorry. I'll never do it again. And I've deeply considered that my role in the foreign policy establishment is where we are today. And I will use that experience in order to form it. Not hard, right?
Right.
But
and you know what?
The hubris that these guys have, him and John Kerry, they can't say it.
People may not forgive him for that. I mean, that's what Hillary ultimately said. She admitted fully that it was a mistake, and she was just one vote. She wasn't a leader in this process. And people said, you know what, it's not good enough, because in the moment when it was your judgment and when you put your finger to the wind and you saw that the easy political decision was to send our men and women overseas to fight and die for what? To destroy the entire region, the consequences of which we are still bearing today, people looked at that and said, look, I'm sorry, but an apology is not enough. And I think that context is really important, because why are we talking about this right now? Why are we talking about this now? It's because we can see so clearly how we are still living with the ramifications of that horrible decision that Biden was an integral part of. As we deal with this whole fallout from Iran, that is why this is newly called into question. And I hope tomorrow night on the debate stage, I hope that this is a central point of conversation, because there is nothing that is more critical in this race.
The problem is, I don't think it's going to be. They're going to say something like, Senator Sanders has attacked you for your vote on the war in Iraq. Do you have a response? And it really should be like, you make the case I just made. Say you supported the Iraq war. Years afterwards, what's your response? And let's actually press him a little bit. The last time that Bernie said something about how he voted for the Iraq war, he literally just threw up his hands. So let's see if he's going to do something.
Well, I do think that Bernie is on a more aggressive footing these days, and so he may be the one to prosecute the case more directly this time. Or you can't rely on the moderators to do it, you know. And look, no candidate should be relying on the moderators. They got to come in with their own game plan, and they got to make their own way in this thing. I think Biden may have a tougher time tomorrow night on this issue than he's had in the past.
We're going to see. All right, I'm looking forward to your radar next, Crystal.